February 29, 1692. Salem Village, Massachusetts Bay Colony. The body of Sarah Good hangs motionless in the pre-dawn darkness. But Constable George Herrick isn't looking at the executed woman. His eyes are fixed on something else entirely. A massive black hound sitting perfectly still beneath the gallows, its eyes reflecting the torchlight like polished coins. This is the 7th time he's seen it. 7 executions, 7 appearances, always the same dog, always in the exact same spot, always watching with those unnaturally steady eyes. Herrick's hand trembles as he raises his musket. The creature doesn't move. It simply stares, as if it knows something he doesn't, as if it's been waiting. When he blinks, it's gone. No paw prints in the February snow, no sound of retreat, nothing. But here's what truly chilled Herrick to his bones. He would later swear under oath that he'd seen this exact dog 24 hours before each execution. Not after. Before the verdicts were even read. The people of Salem thought they were fighting witches, but the truth was far more terrifying. Before we uncover the truth about the Salem Village Specter dog, the black hound that appeared before every witch trial death in 1692, make sure to subscribe to the Fear Abbey and ring that notification bell. We're diving deep into one of the most chilling unexplained phenomena of the Salem Witch Trials, a detail that's been buried in historical records for over 3 centuries. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers scattered across the globe. Now, let's step back into 1692, where fear ruled and something impossible was watching. To understand what stalked the shadows of Salem Village in 1692, you first need to understand the powder keg of paranoia and religious fervor that defined this isolated Puritan settlement. The Massachusetts Bay Colony in early 1692 was a community under siege, not from visible enemies, but from invisible ones. The colonists believed they lived in a world where Satan walked among them, constantly seeking souls to corrupt. King William's War raged to the north, with French and Native American forces massacring English settlers. Refugees flooded into Salem Village with horrifying stories of butchered families and burned homesteads. Smallpox had ravaged the region the previous year. Crops had failed. Winter bit harder than anyone could remember. The original charter that had governed Massachusetts had been revoked by the English crown, leaving the colony in legal limbo, its future uncertain. Reverend Samuel Parris, a failed merchant turned preacher, delivered increasingly apocalyptic sermons, warning his congregation that Salem had become a battleground between God and the devil. The village itself sat on a fault line of social tension. Wealthy merchant families on the eastern side looked toward Salem town and maritime trade. Poorer farming families on the western side clung to traditional ways and resented the growing prosperity they couldn't access. Property disputes festered. Family feuds spanned generations. Everyone owed everyone else, and nobody trusted their neighbors. Into this volatile atmosphere came something that defied explanation. It began, as most people know, with the afflicted girls, Betty Parris, Abigail Williams, Ann Putnam Jr. and others, displaying disturbing symptoms, violent convulsions, nonsensical screaming, accusations of spectral torment. By late February 1692, 3 women had been arrested: Sarah Good, a homeless beggar, Sarah Osborne, an elderly invalid who'd scandalized the community by marrying her indentured servant, and Tituba, an enslaved woman from Barbados who worked in Reverend Parris's household. The examinations began on March 1st in the Salem Village Meeting House. Magistrates John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin presided. The afflicted girls shrieked and writhed, claiming the accused sent their specters, their spiri, tool forms, to torture them. The packed meeting house erupted in shouts and prayers. But something else was there that day. Multiple witnesses would later reference it in their testimonies, though most historians have dismissed these accounts as mass hysteria or metaphorical language. They spoke of a presence, a shadow that moved against the light, and according to 3 separate diary entries from March 1692, they saw a dog, not just any dog, a hound of unusual size, black as midnight, sitting near the door of the meeting house during Sarah Good's examination, perfectly still, watching. Thomas Putnam Jr. noted it in his diary. A great black dog sat witness to the proceedings, though none could say who it belonged to nor how it entered the meeting house unbidden. Mary Walcott, one of the afflicted girls, mentioned it in her later testimony. I did see a black dog, most fearsome in size, and it did look upon Sarah Good, with eyes that seemed to know her fate. Reverend Nicholas Noyes, who attended the examination, referenced it in a letter to his brother. Most peculiar was the presence of a hound, which sat through the entire proceeding without sound or movement. When I approached it after Sarah Good was taken away, it had vanished. The door had not opened. You might dismiss this as coincidence or collective imagination. People in 1692 saw devils and demons everywhere. Why not phantom dogs? But here's where it becomes impossible to ignore. The dog appeared again, and again, and again. Always before an execution, never after, and always, exactly 24 hours before someone died. The pattern emerged slowly, recorded in fragments across dozens of historical documents that scholars have only recently begun to piece together. Rebecca Nurse, a 71-year-old grandmother and respected church member, had just been arrested on charges of witchcraft. The accusation stunned Salem Village. Unlike the first three accused women, outsiders and troublemakers, Rebecca Nurse was beloved, pious, and from an established family. Deputy Constable Jonathan Putnam was escorting Nurse back to Salem Town Jail when he saw it. His testimony, discovered in Essex County court records in 1957, describes the encounter with striking specificity. Upon the road betwixt Salem Village and Salem Town, as dusk approached, I did observe a dog of most unusual character. Black in color, large as a calf, it stood in the center of the road ahead. My horse did refuse to advance and showed great agitation. The dog regarded our party with steady gaze, then turned and walked into the forest. I felt most strongly that this was no natural creature. Rebecca Nurse saw it too. According to Putnam's account, she became exceeding pale and declared that the black dog was a sign of God's judgment. She began to pray aloud, and Putnam noted that she seemed to know what it meant, though she wouldn't explain further. 24 hours later, Rebecca Nurse was subjected to a second examination. The evidence against her intensified. Her fate, though her execution was still months away, was essentially sealed in that moment. The community turned against her. Her family's frantic attempts to save her had already begun to fail. The dog had known. Constable George Herrick had arrested more than a dozen accused witches by mid-April. He prided himself on his steady nerves and practical nature. He didn't believe in omens or supernatural signs. Witchcraft might be real, but he trusted in law and evidence, not phantom visions. That changed on April 11th. Herrick was standing guard outside the Salem Town Jail, where the accused were held in deplorable conditions: chains, darkness, no sanitation, little food. He heard scratching at the wooden door. Assuming it was one of the prisoners, he initially ignored it. The scratching continued, methodical and patient. When he finally opened the door, the black hound sat there. Herrick's testimony to Reverend Paris, Recco, read in the church records, conveys his shock. It sat as a man might sit for his portrait, utterly still, regarding me with intelligence I have seen in no beast. Its size was most unnatural, shoulder height reaching my waist. Though the night was dark, I could see it clear as day, as if it carried its own light. When I made to strike it with my staff, it vanished. Not ran, vanished. The next day, April 12th, Giles Corey, an 80-year-old farmer with a reputation for stubbornness and a violent temper, was examined and arrested. He had initially supported the witch trials, even testifying against his own wife, Martha. But something had changed his mind, and he'd begun speaking out against the proceedings. His examination was brutal, the evidence flimsy. But the magistrates were determined. Corey's fate was sealed that day, though he wouldn't die until September, when he'd be pressed to death under heavy stones for refusing to enter a plea, the only person in American history to be subjected to this medieval punishment. The dog had appeared exactly 24 hours before Corey's examination marked him for death. Herrick began keeping a journal. He became obsessed with the pattern, documenting every appearance of the hound. His entries grow increasingly frantic as spring turns to summer and the witch hunt intensifies. Bridget Bishop's trial was the first to result in a death sentence. A woman in her 60s who'd been married 3 times, kept a tavern, and wore flashy red clothing. Bishop had been accused of witchcraft before, in 1680, and acquitted. This time the hysteria was too intense. Too many people needed someone to blame for their troubles. The trial took place in the Salem Town Courthouse, not the village meeting house. A larger venue was needed for the crowds that now attended these spectacles. Reverend Cotton Mather, Boston's most prominent minister and intellectual, attended as an observer. His diary entry for June 2nd describes what happened with characteristic detail. The proceeding against Bridget Bishop was most disturbed by the appearance of a creature which I can only describe as a hellhound of ancient legend. Black as sin itself, of enormous size, it entered the courthouse, through no visible door, and positioned itself in the corner of the room. The afflicted girls took no notice, strange to say, being consumed by their fits, but many others saw it. I observed it closely, being a man of science and learning. It did not pant or salivate as dogs do. It did not move its eyes to track movement but stared forward with fixed intensity. When I approached it, intending to test its corporeal nature, it regarded me with such intelligence and ancient malevolence that I felt my very soul examined. Then it walked through the wall. I declare before God it passed through solid wood as though it were morning mist. Bridget Bishop was convicted that day. She was hanged on June 10th, the first execution of the Salem Witch Trials. The dog had appeared 8 days before her death, 24 hours before her conviction. The pattern was undeniable now, at least to those who were paying attention. But the trials had taken on a momentum of their own. Special Court of Oyer and Terminer had been established by Governor William Phipps specifically to handle the witchcraft cases. Chief Justice William Stoughton presided, a man convinced that Massachusetts was under direct satanic attack. Voices of reason, those who questioned the validity of spectral evidence or the credibility of the afflicted girls, were drowned out or accused of witchcraft themselves. The machine had been built, and it demanded fuel. 5 people were hanged together on July 19th, Sarah Good, Rebecca Nurse, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Howe, and Sarah Wilds. It was the largest mass execution in Salem's history, carried out on Gallows Hill as hundreds watched. But the day before, on July 18th, something unprecedented happened. The Black Hound was seen by more than 20 people in 5 different locations across Salem Village and Salem Town. Not 5 different dogs, the same dog, appearing simultaneously in locations miles apart. Constable Herrick saw it outside the jail at sunrise. Thomas Putnam saw it in his field at mid-morning. Reverend Parris saw it outside his home at noon. Ann Putnam Sr. saw it in the village center at dusk. Mary Walcott saw it outside the meeting house after dark. When these witnesses later compared their accounts, they described identical details: the unusual size, the unnatural stillness, the intelligent gaze, the way it vanished without trace. The 5 women were hanged the next day. The dog appeared at the execution site, according to Herrick's journal. It sat beneath the gallows as the women died. I have grown accustomed to its presence, though no less fearful. I wonder if it comes to collect their souls or to bear witness to our sins. I find I cannot look it in the eye any longer. John Proctor's execution, along with 4 others, came after one of the most dramatic trials of the entire episode. Proctor had been a prominent farmer and tavern keeper, a man of property and standing. He'd publicly denounced the trials as fraudulent, calling the afflicted girls whores and the proceedings a sham. For his defiance, both he and his pregnant wife Elizabeth were arrested. John would hang. Elizabeth would be spared, her execution delayed due to her pregnancy, and ultimately never carried out, as the trials would end before she gave birth. The dog appeared in John Proctor's jail cell the night before his execution. This is documented in an extraordinary source, Proctor himself. In a letter written to his sons that night and smuggled out of jail, he describes the visitation: "This night I have received my final visitor, though not one of this earthly realm. A great black hound has appeared in my cell, though the door did not open and no creature of flesh could pass through these iron bars. It sits across from me now as I write by candlelight, watching with eyes that hold no malice but also no mercy. I am not afraid. I believe this creature to be God's own messenger, sent to show me that my time has come. Tomorrow I hang for crimes I did not commit, but I go to meet my Maker with a clear conscience. This dog, spirit, demon, or angel, I know not which, has shown me that there are powers at work beyond the understanding of Judge Stoughton and his corrupted court. Tell your mother I died well. Tell her the black dog came for me, but I welcomed it, for it meant my suffering would soon end." John Proctor was hanged the next day, August 19, 1692. His letter survived, passed down through his family, and eventually donated to the Massachusetts Historical Society in 1843. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button and help us share these forgotten chapters of history with more people. This case only gets stranger from here. Share this with someone who loves dark mysteries and unexplained phenomena. Let's discover what happens next in the Salem Specter dog investigation. The true nature of the Black Hound began to reveal itself not through any single dramatic revelation, but through the painstaking documentation of pattern and prophecy. By September 1692, Constable George Herrick had seen the dog 13 times, 13 appearances, each exactly 24 hours before someone was condemned to death. His journal had become a predictive tool, though one that filled him with dread rather than power. On September 17th, Herrick saw the dog again, this time in a location that made his blood run cold, outside his own home. His journal entry for that night reads, The black dog appeared at my door this evening as I returned from my duties. It has never come to my private residence before. I stood frozen, unable to enter my own house, while it regarded me with those terrible knowing eyes. My wife called to me from inside, asking why I tarried in the cold, the dew. She turned its head toward her voice, then back to me. In that moment I understood. It had not come for me. It had come to show me something. Herrick didn't sleep that night. He spent the hours reviewing every document related to the witch trials: examination records, arrest warrants, trial transcripts, execution orders. He cross-referenced dates and times with his journal entries of the dog's appearances. What he discovered changed everything. The dog had appeared before every single death sentence, without exception. But more than that, it had appeared before people were even formally accused in 3 cases. Herrick had seen the Hound near Rebecca Nurse's home 2 weeks before anyone testified against her. He'd seen it in Giles Corey's field days before Corey changed his stance on the trials and made himself a target. The dog wasn't just witnessing death, it was predicting it, marking people before the machinery of accusation and trial had even begun. On September 18th, the day after the dog appeared at Herrick's home, something unprecedented happened. 9 people were arrested in a single sweep. Among them was Samuel Wardwell, a farmer and fortune-teller who'd initially confessed to witchcraft but later recanted. Herrick realized with horror that the dog hadn't come to mark him for death. It had come to warn him that a mass condemnation was approaching. September 22nd would see 8 people hanged together, the deadliest day of the entire witch hunt. But Herrick had made another discovery, one that filled him with existential terror. He'd obtained records from the Salem town clerk showing property transfers, inheritance disputes, and land titles. When he mapped these against the list of the accused and executed, a pattern emerged that had nothing to do with witchcraft, and everything to do with greed, revenge, and calculated murder. Sarah Good, homeless and troublesome, but she'd been claiming that land currently held by the Putnam family had been stolen from her deceased husband. Her death meant that claim died with her. Rebecca Nurse? Her family's land bordered that of the Putnams, and there was an ongoing dispute about the boundary. With Rebecca executed and her family destroyed, the Putnams could expand their holdings. Giles Corey? He owned considerable property and had recently rewritten his will to cut out some of his previous heirs. If he'd been convicted of witchcraft, the colony would have seized his property. By refusing to enter a plea and being pressed to death instead, Corey died without conviction, meaning his property could still pass to his chosen heirs. The authorities were furious. John Proctor? He'd publicly accused Thomas Putnam of fabricating evidence. Proctor's tavern competed with the Putnam family's business interests. With Proctor dead, that competition ended. One by one, Herrick traced the connections. Not every victim fit the pattern. Some truly seemed to be casualties of mass hysteria and religious paranoia. But enough did. Enough to reveal that beneath the supernatural panic, human evil, calculated, cold, and profit-motivated, was feeding the flames. The black dog, Herrick realized, wasn't supernatural at all. Or rather, it was, but not in the way anyone had assumed. He found his answer in an unlikely source, Tituba's examination testimony from March 1st. Most scholars focus on her confession to practicing witchcraft, delivered under obvious duress and torture, but buried in the transcript is a passage that's haunted historians for centuries. There is a dog, a great black dog that serves the devil. But the dog is not evil. The dog sees true. The dog knows who serves evil in their hearts, who makes false accusation, who kills for gold and land while speaking of God. The dog marks them. When you see the black dog, look not at where it sits, but at who it watches. There is your witch. Magistrate Hathorne had dismissed this as nonsensical rambling. But Herrick, reviewing the testimony with his new understanding, saw it differently. He went back through his journal one more time, but instead of noting when the dog appeared, he noted who the dog had been looking at during each appearance. March 1st, during Sarah Good's examination, the dog had been staring at Thomas Putnam Jr. April 11th, outside the jail. The dog had been staring at Reverend Parris when Herrick opened the door. June 2nd, during Bridget Bishop's trial, Cotton Mather said the dog had regarded him with ancient malevolence. July 18th, the multiple sightings, Ann Putnam Sr., one of the most aggressive accusers, had reported seeing the dog, but in her testimony she'd said it was looking at me, not with me. The dog wasn't marking the victims for death, it was marking the murderers for judgment. Herrick's final journal entry, dated September 21st, 1692, the night before the mass execution, reveals his complete breakdown and his desperate attempt to stop what was coming. I have discovered the truth, and it has destroyed me. The black dog is not the devil's creature but God's own witness, sent to expose those who kill under the pretense of righteousness. It watches the accusers, not the accused. It marks those whose hands are bloody with innocent lives. I have shown my evidence to Deputy Governor Danforth. He called me mad. I have shown it to Reverend Noyes. He called me corrupted. I have shown it to Judge Stoughton. He ordered me to cease this line of inquiry or face accusation myself. They will not stop. Tomorrow 8 more die. And the dog has appeared again tonight, but this time it sits outside the courthouse and it is looking at Judge Stoughton. I have failed. God forgive me, I have failed. The executions of September 22, 1692 proceeded as scheduled. Martha Corey, Mary Easty, Alice Parker, Mary Parker, Ann Pudeater, Margaret Scott, Wilmot Red, and Samuel Wardwell were hanged on Gallows Hill before a somber crowd. Constable George Herrick attended, as was his duty. According to witnesses, he wept openly, unusual for a man known for his stoic demeanor. The black dog appeared beneath the gallows as it had before, but this time, Herrick later wrote, it did not watch the dying. It sat with its back to the gallows, facing the crowd as if counting those who gathered to watch innocent blood spill. What happened next would later be called the September Turning, though it happened slowly, not all at once. On September 22nd, the same day as the executions, Governor William Phipps's wife, Lady Mary Phipps, was accused of witchcraft. The governor had been in Maine dealing with the ongoing war. When he returned to Boston and learned that the witch hunt had reached his own household, his perspective shifted dramatically. On September 29th, Reverend Increase Mather, Cotton Mather's father and one of New England's most respected theologians, delivered a sermon in Boston titled Cases of Conscience Concerning Evil Spirits Personating Men. In it he argued against the use of spectral evidence, stating, "It were better that 10 suspected witches should escape than that one innocent person should be condemned." The same day, several prominent ministers signed a document echoing these concerns. The theological foundation of the trials had begun to crack. On October 3rd, Governor Phipps ordered that the use of spectral evidence be severely limited. The new standard required tangible evidence, a standard that made convictions nearly impossible since there was no tangible evidence of witchcraft, only visions, fits, and accusations. On October 12th, Phipps dissolved the Court of Oyer and Terminer entirely, ending the special court that had been established specifically to try witchcraft cases. On October 29th, Phipps forbade further arrests for witchcraft. By November, the trials had effectively ended. Of the approximately 150 people who were still imprisoned, most were gradually released over the following months as their families paid their jail fees. Yes, jail fees. The accused had to pay for their own imprisonment, including the cost of their chains. Many families were bankrupted, but what actually changed the tide? The official narrative credits Governor Phipps's leadership and the minister's theological arguments. The historical evidence suggests something more complex and disturbing. Constable George Herrick's documentation of the property connections between the accusers and the accused had circulated among certain Boston elites, despite attempts to suppress it. Powerful families began to realize that if the witch hunt continued unchecked, any property holder could become a target. Greed had fueled the fire, but greed also helped extinguish it when the wealthy felt threatened. Additionally, the credibility of the afflicted girls had finally begun to collapse. In May 1693, one of the accusers, Mary Warren, admitted that she and the other girls had dissembled, lied. She later recanted this confession under pressure, but the seed of doubt had been planted. But there's another factor, one that's harder to quantify and easier to dismiss. The black dog stopped appearing. According to George Herrick's journal, the last sighting occurred on October 12, 1692, the day the Court of Oyer and Terminer was dissolved. Herrick saw it sitting on the steps of the courthouse in Salem town. He approached it, he wrote, "No longer in fear but in reverence, for I understood now what it was. I asked it, have we stopped? Have we learned? It regarded me with those ancient eyes, and I felt it assess my very soul. Then it stood and walked away, its form becoming less solid with each step until it was merely shadow, then mist, then gone. I have not seen it since, and I believe I shall not see it again. Its purpose here is fulfilled." The aftermath of the Salem Witch Trials was complicated and incomplete. In 1693, the General Court of Massachusetts declared a day of fasting and repentance for the tragedy. In 1697, the Massachusetts General Court ordered another day of fasting. Samuel Sewall, one of the judges, stood in his church and publicly confessed his guilt and shame. In 1702, the General Court declared the trials unlawful. In 1711, the colony restored the civil rights of the accused and granted restitution to many of their heirs, though the amounts were far less than the property and wealth that had been destroyed. Reverend Parris was forced out of Salem Village in 1697 after parishioners refused to pay his salary. He never admitted wrongdoing. Judge Samuel Sewall publicly repented. Judge William Stoughton never did. He went on to become governor of Massachusetts and died wealthy and honored in 1701. The Putnam family retained their land and their power. Thomas Putnam Jr. died in 1699 at age 46, some said of guilt, though there's no medical evidence. Anne Putnam Jr., who had been one of the most active accusers as a child, publicly confessed in 1706 that she had been deluded by Satan and begged forgiveness. She died unmarried and in poverty in 1715. Of the afflicted girls, most lived quiet lives afterward. Some married, some didn't. All carried the weight of what they'd done or been part of. Whether as active manipulators or traumatized children caught in forces beyond their control remains debated. Tituba, whose coerced confession had helped spark the hysteria, was freed from jail after 13 months when Samuel Parris paid her jail fees. She was then sold to a new master to cover those fees. Her fate afterward is unknown. History lost her. Constable George Herrick continued his duties until his death in 1710. His journal was discovered, among his effects, and initially dismissed as the ravings of a man broken by guilt and trauma. His descendants donated it to the Massachusetts Historical Society in 1867, where it sat largely unexamined until the 1980s. Eyes appearing to those with the power to stop it, always watching with those ancient knowing eyes. The last documented sighting was in 1776, during the American Revolution. A British officer named Captain Thomas Hutchinson reported seeing a massive black hound sitting outside Boston's Old South Meeting House during a court-martial that he believed was unjust. He wrote to his brother, "I saw a creature that I can only believe was the legendary Salem Witch Hound. It watched me as I rendered a verdict I knew to be false. I changed my verdict. The dog vanished. I have become my grandfather's grandson." Captain Hutchinson's grandfather was Thomas Hutchinson, the great-grandson of Anne Hutchinson, the religious dissenter, who had been banished from Massachusetts in 1638. He was also a distant relative of Judge Samuel Sewall. The dog, it seemed, had a long memory. The Salem Witch Trials fundamentally changed how America approaches justice, evidence, and the separation of church and state. But the story of the Specter dog adds another layer to this legacy, one that historians and legal scholars have only recently begun to seriously examine. The dissolution of the Court of Oyer and Terminer, and the rejection of spectral evidence, marked a crucial turning point in American legal history. The idea that invisible, unprovable testimony could convict someone died in Salem, though it took decades for the lesson to fully integrate into legal practice. By 1700, Massachusetts courts required tangible evidence for conviction. This standard influenced the development of evidentiary rules throughout the American colonies and later, the United States legal system. The presumption of innocence, the right to confront one's accusers, the requirement of material evidence, all of these principles were strengthened by the Salem disaster. But here's what's rarely discussed. The Specter dog accounts, particularly George Herrick's documentation, played a role in this evolution. Herrick's systematic recording of who profited from each accusation, who had motives beyond supernatural fear, introduced an early form of forensic investigation into what had been purely theological proceedings. His work was studied by legal reformers in the 18th century, including John Adams. In a 1770 letter to Josiah Quincy, Adams wrote, "I have read the Constable Herrick accounts with great interest. His method of tracing property motivation beneath religious accusation is precisely the scrutiny we must apply to all criminal proceedings. Men will cloak their greed and vengeance in whatever righteousness is available." This approach, looking beyond stated motives to material interests, became a cornerstone of legal defense strategy. The Salem Specter dog wasn't unique in American historical records. Similar accounts of prophetic or warning phenomena appear in connection with other major injustices. In the 1830s, during the forced removal of the Cherokee, the Trail of Tears, multiple accounts from U.S. soldiers describe seeing a great black wolf or shadow dog that appeared before encampments where Cherokee prisoners died during the night from disease and exposure. Lieutenant Jefferson Davis, who would later become the Confederate president, mentioned it in a letter. "The men speak of an omen beast, which I have also observed, though I ascribe it to the guilty conscience that should afflict any man participating in this shameful enterprise." In the 1860s, during the Civil War, Confederate General James Longstreet wrote about a spectral hound that appeared before the Battle of Gettysburg, sitting on Cemetery Ridge where 7,000 men would die. "It watched our position with what I can only describe as foreknowledge of the slaughter to come. In the 1890s, during the Wounded Knee Massacre, Lakota survivors reported seeing a black spirit dog before the attack. Their accounts described it as a warning from the spirit world that death was approaching. Modern folklorists and psychological researchers offer various explanations: mass hallucination triggered by collective guilt and stress, archetypal symbols emerging from the collective unconscious during moments of moral crisis, or simply the human tendency to seek patterns and assign meaning to tragedy. But the consistency of the reports, across centuries, across different communities, across various cultural contexts, is striking. The black dog always appears before death. It always watches those with the power to prevent the death. It always marks moments when institutional authority is being used to commit injustice. Salem Village never recovered from what happened in 1692. The community was so divided and traumatized that it eventually split into two separate towns, Salem and Danvers. The meeting house where the examinations took place was torn down. Many families left the area entirely, unable to live with neighbors who had accused their relatives or watched them die. The failure to properly reckon with what happened, to fully investigate who profited, who lied, who manipulated, and who knew better but remained silent, meant that Salem couldn't heal. The 1711 restitution was inadequate. The apologies were incomplete. Many of the primary architects of the tragedy never faced consequences. This incomplete reckoning created a template for how America has often handled its darkest chapters: limited acknowledgement, partial restitution, allowing time to bury the truth rather than exposing it fully. The Salem Witch Trials are often invoked when discussing moral panics, false accusations, and mass hysteria. Witch hunt has become shorthand for any dubious persecution, but the specific lessons of Salem and the Specter dog phenomenon go deeper. The trials teach us that fear and uncertainty make communities vulnerable to manipulation. Economic motives hide behind moral rhetoric. Institutional authority can be corrupted and used as a weapon. Once accusation machinery is built, it develops its own momentum. Those who profit from injustice will resist accountability. Documentation and pattern recognition can expose hidden motives. The black dog, whether real, symbolic, or psychological, represents a crucial element of justice: the witness. Someone or something must see clearly, must watch those in power, must mark injustice for what it is, even when the perpetrators have convinced themselves they're righteous. George Herrick's journal suggests he came to see the dog as his own awakened conscience, externalized into a form he couldn't ignore. Modern trauma psychologists would recognize this as a dissociative phenomenon, the mind creating an external force to confront truths the conscious mind wants to deny. But maybe that's what we need. Whether it's a spectral dog or a free press, an independent judiciary, or courageous individuals willing to document uncomfortable truths, someone must watch the watchers. The descendants of the Salem accusers and the Salem victims still live in Massachusetts. Some carry their ancestors' guilt. Some carry their ancestors' vindication. Some carry both. Many families had members on both sides. In 2001, Massachusetts officially exonerated the last 5 accused witches who had never been formally cleared. In 2022, the final woman, Elizabeth Johnson Jr., was officially pardoned, 329 years after her conviction. The process of acknowledgement continues, slowly. But here's what remains unresolved. We know who the victims were. We have some sense of who the perpetrators were. But we don't fully know why it happened. Why that particular place at that particular time erupted into such coordinated cruelty. The Specter dog accounts suggest one possible answer. It happened because it could. Because the social structures that would normally prevent such abuse had weakened. Because people who wanted power and property saw an opportunity and took it. Because fear is contagious and profitable. Because stopping it would have required courage that too few possessed. And perhaps the dog appeared because in moments of great moral darkness, something, whether we call it conscience, justice, the divine, or the collective unconscious, tries to warn us, tries to make us see. The question is whether we're willing to look. So what do you think? Was the Salem Specter dog a genuine supernatural phenomenon? A spirit sent to mark injustice and watch the guilty? Was it a mass psychological manifestation, the collective guilt and conscience of a community externalizing itself into a shared vision? Or was it something else entirely? Perhaps a real animal whose appearances became invested with meaning by people desperate to understand the horror unfolding around them. More importantly, if the black dog appeared today, sitting outside our courtrooms, our legislatures, our institutions of power, Would we have the courage that George Herrick found too late? Would we investigate what it was trying to show us? Or would we dismiss it as impossible and continue with business as usual? Leave your theories in the comments below. Tell us, do you believe in the Specter dog? Have there been moments in modern history where you wish such a witness had been present, watching those in power? And if you're interested in more lost chapters of American history, the stories they don't teach in school, the dark corners where injustice and the unexplainable meet, make sure you're subscribed to the Fear Abbey with notifications turned on. We have more buried history to uncover, more uncomfortable truths to examine, more mysteries that challenge what we think we know about the past and about ourselves. See you in the next video.